Thanks to Windows on the World.
Bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories on tonight's show. This week on Windows on the World, we're going to talk again to David Howard, who's done some very interesting interviews with us, and we've tackled Agenda 21, the climate change con, and also David's last contribution was why the government does not work for you, and he's taken this one step further now. I'm going to talk about that today. So David Howard, welcome back to Windows on the World.
Hello Mark, yeah, nice to speak to you again.
Great. So you've got a bit more research you want to share with us, and basically ideas really about the way things work and how they affect people. So I'll just give you the floor, David.
Thanks. Well, this is the extension to why the government don't work for you. It's about how you scratch the surface. So when you have something which to a child looks, wow, this is fantastic, why can't we get all the people the same and everyone can be rich? And when you go back to your childhood, you think, oh, you know, I was idealistic. I believed that the government can print money, you know, as in quantitative easing. And why do we have to have taxes? The government can just make the money and feed the poor and do all these things. Now, they're good ideals, but you have to understand the economics and the structure behind them. And unfortunately, most people don't. People are too busy going about their daily lives, and they either aren't interested or they don't understand the basics. Now, the great thing about politics and economics is that it's not complicated. The politicians, economists and scientists do very complicated, difficult work, but you can then take what they've done and present it in a way that anybody else can understand, because they're doing all the complex equations. All you're doing is seeing the fruits of their labours. So until they can come to a point where they can explain their principles clearly, people won't understand them. But obviously the sort of level of arithmetic, a sort of primary school level maths, children will understand things just as easily as adults. If you explain to a child, well, you can't have quantitative easing on this level because the amount of capital, i.e. the amount of physical goods that you have in that country, are not going to change, however much you change the value of them. I said this in the last one, your banana is always worth another banana, and if you say, well, a banana is worth £2, you'll have to cut that banana in half. So you still won't get 2 bananas for £1, you're just causing inflation. So you have to back up your economy with goods and with capital. You can't just create money. So these are the sort of illusions that children have, which are so easily corrected. And most people will go through most of their life without correcting them, and the government will exploit it and take most incredible liberties with you. And as a result, they will exploit people, as you say, and I say, with their consent, i.e. the voting. If you vote for people, you are consenting for them to castrate you or take your oldest born child or something because you have been told it's good for you. But it's not good for you, it's hurting you. And it's only when they go too far, so when they take a liberty, when they cross that line and they actually, for example, introduce immigrants in who then blow you up, you realise, oh my God, you know, we shouldn't have open borders because it lets the terrorists in as well as all the genuine people. So what I'm going to do today is to give a list of examples where the politicians tell you this is wonderful, and then they basically pee on you and say it's raining. So I'm going to say, well, look, you know, it's not rain, it's pee. One's yellow, one's clear. Tell the difference and you will not get ripped off again. So that is the basic premise of it. If there's anything you'd like to respond to that.
Well, I think that's a very good idea, and this consensus reality that we've been fed, which I've been reporting on quite a lot, and we've talked about in quite some depth, is very important to get through. So I think that your opening salvo there was pretty good. So carry on, David.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to go through a list of things. We've done the ones before about quantitative easing and high house prices and low interest rates, which are actually one and the same thing. So I'll explain that again for the new people that are listening. Basically, if you buy a car or anything else, the more it will cost you, then of course nobody is in any doubt that if a Ford Escort, going back to the days when they existed, cost £5,000, it was a lot cheaper than one which cost £10,000 a few years later. So if you can start off with a concept that everyone understands. Now, the only difference between your Ford Escort and your house is your house doesn't lose value over time. So that's what confuses people. Other than that, they are identical. They're both things you need. They're both assets, and you still have to pay for them both. So what happens is that the Ford Escort goes from £5,000 to £10,000, and everyone says, oh my goodness, I need a car. I'm either going to have to get an older car and pay £5,000, or if I want a new car, I'm going to have to take £5,000 from my fixed budget. Because the whole thing about economies, whether it's your personal economy or the country's economy, which is why the country borrows so much, is your budget is fixed. And if your budget is fixed, it means that if you have to pay for essentials, there's less left to go round for everything else. So if you think about it, your house costs on average 10 to 20 times more than your car, at least. So what happens if the house prices go up? You are spending more and more money on your house. If you don't have a driving license, or you can't afford a car, you don't buy a car. But everyone has to live somewhere, and so the people will say, well, why don't you rent? Well, it's exactly the same. You're paying as much a month to rent as you do for a mortgage. So the two things are completely connected, because the people you are renting from had to buy the houses in the first place, and they need their money back. So it's irrelevant whether you're renting or buying. So the whole point is, high house prices help one type of person only, the person with a spare house. Because if you buy your house for £100,000 and you sell it for £200,000, what do you do with the profit? I think I've asked you this one before. Do you want to guess what you do with the profit?
Well, I think we know, but tell us anyway.
You have to buy another house with it,
Exactly.
otherwise you're sleeping in the garage.
Yes.
It's not a liquid asset. Your house is not a liquid asset because you need to live somewhere. So if you say, oh, I'm going to give up driving, and you sell your car for £500, you've got £500 extra. If you want to buy a house and you paid £100,000 for your house, which is now worth £200,000, you say, oh, my house is worth £200,000. If you want to buy another one, it's going to cost you £200,000 to buy the same one. So all you've done is created half a banana.
Yeah,
so
what this work, Dave, is quite an important point, that, because this is what's happening, and I'm seeing this happening, that a lot of younger people are inheriting property and assets from their parents in order to basically buy a one-bedroom flat. Well, what kind of asset is that going to be in the future? Because the people who've inherited real property, i.e. houses with gardens that are worth something, are then transferring that money into something that is a quarter of the size.
So the whole point is that when they talk about inflation, they're only giving you half the equation. So I will give people two words, the most important two words about the economics of your personal life than anything else, is purchasing power. So your purchasing power is not the inflation as such, it's what that pound or £100 or £1,000 will buy compared to last year or next year. Because if your pound is worth £1 next year, you'll have stability and you'll know exactly what you're going to do with it. And if you get deflation, your pound is actually worth a percentage extra, so it's actually good for you to have deflation, because you'll still have all that money in the bank, but it'll be worth more. But all these people who see the prices either stay stable and say there's no inflation, when in fact you've got all these biscuits, because you can measure a biscuit. If you've got an old wagon wheel, for example, which you wouldn't have because you'd have eaten it, but I can remember a wagon wheel used to be about 5 inches long by coincidence, and now they're about 3 inches long, but you still pay the same. And the same with club biscuits and taxes or anything else. Chocolate biscuits have all shrunk by about 25%.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. So they know perfectly well, and it's on Watchdog as well, they know perfectly well that the people will not notice, or they will, but not in such numbers, if the size goes down compared to the price going up. And that's a perfect example of thief economics, because what they're doing is they're trying to con people and saying, well, you've still got the same amount of money coming in, stop complaining. Well, it's not austerity, it's theft, because they're taking a percentage of money away through quantitative easing and through low interest rates. And I'll tell you another thing about macroeconomics is that you don't lose money. Somebody always gets it. So when they say the economy shrank by a certain amount, or a certain amount was wiped off shares, it didn't disappear. The money itself, the assets, don't shrink and disappear. All they do is they take your money from you and give it to someone else. So whether it goes to hedge funds or governments or whatever, that money's gone somewhere. So with mortgages, if you don't pay your mortgage, somebody's been paid. I mean, in fact, if you default on a mortgage, which will never happen in real life, and they don't recover the house back from you, all that's happened is that the investor has lost the money and they made a bad deal, and you've gained a profit of getting a free house. But in the real world, if your share value goes down, it doesn't exist until you actually sell those shares. So people really have to just do your basic arithmetic and basic accounting, which we would do in all households, to see what's really happening, and don't be fooled by irrelevant price movements, because if your house is worth more or less, it's irrelevant until you want to move anyway. And the only people who benefit from high house prices are the people who have more than one house, because if you've got a spare house or houses that you don't need, of course, it suddenly becomes the only guaranteed rising asset, because unlike gold and silver and art and things which can go up and down, you have never seen more than maybe 6 months or a year in Western society where house prices have gone down, because people always need houses, so they will always go up unless the economy is changed in a way to keep them stable, or even go down. So it is a complete illusion, and the two things which keep house prices high are quantitative easing, which basically debases the value of everybody's money and takes off a percentage and creams it off to the bankers, because don't forget the bankers are the only people, and the governments, that can borrow at base rates. So you've got this incredible situation where base rate is 0.5% and the average credit card doesn't catch up. The only thing that's tied to base rate for you and me is mortgage rates. But mortgage rates are, again, they are completely illusory. Why? Because if you go to an estate agent and you say, I want a mortgage, they will calculate not the price of the house, but they will calculate the interest rate divided by the price of your house and compare it with 3 to 10 times your income. Now, up till the 80s, you couldn't borrow more than 3 times your income, because everyone knew that if you're paying more than that per year, you're going to be in poverty, and that's if the interest rates are average. And then they go up, you'll be unable to pay, they will lose their investment, and everyone will be in trouble. Now suddenly, in the last 20 years, they've taken that cap off. You can now get 10 to 12 times your income, and people are now paying 50% of their income in London on houses which cost 12 times their income. Now, is that sustainable? Because they are sucking money out of the economy, because all that money is supposed to go on essentials and then luxuries, and what's happening is it's being dragged out of the luxury sector and it's all going on essentials, because most of it's going on housing, which is pretty much the definition of a third world economy. Because you compare yourself with each other country and say, well, how much does the average person earn, and how many bedrooms can they afford with that income on an average income? And we are now going back to where we could have been 200 years ago, like the feudal system or the medieval system. We're going in that direction.
That's exactly where we're going, yes. And we are much poorer than we were 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And people's aspirations have been lowered, because their aspiration now would be to buy a 1-bedroom flat. Well, that wouldn't have been people's aspirations 20 years ago.
And the whole point...
It's been shrunk.
Yeah, the whole point is it's incredibly simple. People think it's all complicated. It's easy, because all you have to think about is when my parents got married, anybody's parents got married, could they afford a 3-bedroom house when they first got married and got a job? Yes, they could. Can they now? No. And why not? Well, I use lateral thinking sometimes in my psychology work, and I say to people, if it's happening to someone else, it's always easier to be objective than subjective. So if you have 3 countries in the world, and one of them that the people work for 40 hours a week and they get a 3-bedroom house on an average income, you would say that's reasonable. So you could say if another country or that country then went to working 60 hours a week and they could afford the 1-bedroom flat with the same income, what would you say? Well, they're a third world country, they're a struggling country. So in 30 years, Britain, and I'll say it's actually deliberate, because it's 90% down to government policies which are entirely changeable and avoidable, gone from an economy where everyone's reasonably well off and has a chance to be a place where only the really successful and hyper-rich can afford an average semi-detached house, and there's something wrong there. And it can be fixed very easily. If the people vote for a government which will say, well, we're not going to leave it to the Bank of England or Janet Yellen, but house prices, because somebody on LBC said a few weeks ago, oh, no government wants to be in charge of house prices falling, because even though they know it's good for the economy, they won't get voted back because the people are too blooming stupid to realise that it's helping them and it's not hurting them. Of course you will get casualties. You'll get these tiny, it's not a huge amount of people, because negative equity is the same as falling share prices. It only affects you when you sell. As long as you're paying your mortgage, it doesn't matter what your house is worth now, because you're paying what it was worth then. And if you wait long enough, it's going to catch up. And if you have to sell, of course, everything you buy is going to cost less anyway, so you don't lose the whole amount. So again, it always balances itself out. You're talking about two sides of the same coin. So I'll stop there on the house prices, because I hope everyone will have got it now, and I don't want to muddy the waters by adding any more, and go on to some other points which are on the same lines. Now, my personal experience was, going from a background with two what you would call left-wing, verging on communism parents who were very idealistic as a child, but had dragged themselves up from not very far to getting very good careers as lawyers. And I started off listening to their ideals and thinking, oh, it would be wonderful if we could all be equal, and etc. And then I realised we weren't all equal, but we all had equal chances. And in a free world, everyone should have the opportunity to be equal. And the government are there as a safety net. So the government should be there not to make rules, because they're not ruling us, they're working for us. We are employing them to look after us, to do the things we can't do. So they're like a housekeeper and a doctor for the NHS. We can't do our own medical treatment, so it's good to have a welfare state, so you look after people that are the worst off, the people in trouble, the people that are ill. And basically, as long as everyone has a reasonable, which I would then say Buckminster Fuller's basic income can provide it and we can afford it. So the government can actually provide everyone with the basics. And then after that, it's free for all. You make as much or as little money or work as you want, and that is simple. So, I worked that out fairly quickly. And then when I first really discovered that the government are not our friends, was the simplest thing of all. We got a letter through our door in about 1976 from Barnet Borough Council saying, we're going to build bus lanes in Barnet, which will mean the buses can get out of all the traffic and have their own lane. I thought, wow, this is wonderful. We're going to have this sort of ultra-modern tomorrow's world type road system, and the buses won't clog up the traffic anymore. You know what they did? What did they do to make the bus lanes, which I'm sure you'll know now, because it's 30 or 40 years later and we know what's happened.
Well, exactly. It's all about narrowing the road.
Exactly. So all they did is they stole it. They did quantitative easing on the roads. They reduced the interest rates on the road so that your road became so narrow. They took half of it away for the buses. And now you sit on Staples Corner in Colindale and Kingsbury, and you watch the buses waiting to get into the bus lane, because all the traffic is queuing up trying to get out of the bus lane half a mile ahead, and it's causing traffic jams twice as far as we ever had before bus lanes. Because what they forgot about is not only does it take the traffic away from sharing the road, so they've got two lanes in the rush hour when the bus lanes operate. The buses have to wait for everyone to get out of the bus lane, and they can't get into the bus lane because it's all queuing up behind it. And I only know one bus lane that was taken away because of that, and all the others, they've left them, even though they know the consequences.
Well, it's very interesting you brought this up, David, because somebody was arguing with me about the fact that there's been more investment in roads. So I've been doing a lot of stuff on this so-called Mini Holland scheme in Walthamstow about getting rid of cars. And their arguments don't stand up, because, yes, they're improving the appearance of roads, but they're not improving the infrastructure. In other words, they're narrowing them. These roads go back to the 1950s. Like the North Circular Road. So what they've done there, they've created 20-foot pavements and narrowed the road at Bowes Road end of North Circular, which just create. So in other words, the road has actually been narrowed and it's deteriorated for drivers. So no, the roads are not being improved. They're being made to look prettier with cycle lanes and very wide pavements. But the agenda, as we know, is to get people out of their cars, which is private transport, onto public transport and easily controlled. So it's simple.
Well, I think it was Orwell that said, if you want to understand governments, just take the exact opposite of what they say, and they're probably right. So these road improvements are actually road ruinations. It's like they're castrating all the roads. If the roads were men, they would now only have one testicle because they've been emasculated by the liberal left Agenda 21 brigade. And the taxi drivers were on the radio last night moaning and groaning quite correctly how hard it is to drive around London. That is since the congestion charge, which they don't even pay, because somewhere like Fleet Street now looks like a cycle track. You can barely drive along Fleet Street because they've taken most of it away. And they've made two entire boroughs, Camden and Islington, into 20-mile-an-hour zones, even though most of the A roads there are perfectly safe to drive at 30.
It's a lot worse than that in Waltham Forest. There's going to be another two so-called villages, Markhouse Village and Blackhorse Village. They've already got Walthamstow Village, which has now had up to 20 roads closed. You can't get in or out of it, and it's a complete Agenda 21 nightmare, and people are waking up to that. There was 1,200 people outside the town hall protesting, but the local change agent newspaper quotes the leader of the council saying this will not be overturned. So really what you're saying is very important, because what we have to realise is that the people who work in public office are not working in the public interest anymore.
Exactly, we're quite the opposite. I mean, the thing is that people have got to bring it back to their basics and their real life. Now, Barnet Council, again, because this is where I lived until 1995, so many of my experiences were from there, published in the Finchley Times some years ago their ambulance figures, that they have more mortalities from ambulances that either can't reach the patient in time because they have to slow down for road humps, or aren't treated properly because the road humps make it unable to put in drips and blood transfusions and things. It's too dangerous, and also they have to drive so slowly over them that they can't get to hospital in time. So road humps, which cost £10,000 each, so if you go along a road with 10 or 15 road humps, that's £150,000 of our money being used. I call it road cancer, because...
Have you got the actual figures on that, David? Because I've never heard that they cost that much money before.
Oh yeah. I mean, just thank goodness for the internet. If you look it up, they cost between £8,000 and £10,000 per road hump.
Yeah.
In total to put in, and it was definitely Barnet Council Ambulance Service that did these figures, because I read it in the paper, and they were reporting it as if it was something like a weather report. Well, 24 people died this year because of the road humps, which wouldn't have had to. They didn't get rid of the road humps, they just reported it. It reminds me of when we had all the road surface around the corner from me where we went to the park. It was all chewed up. So we were going bumpety bump like Kenya or something. It was like being on safari. And do you know what they did about it? They put up a sign saying uneven road. Yeah, we know. So 2 years later, when they had the money, they fixed it. But the point is, if people are dying from road humps, people forget that many of these roads with road humps on are now bus routes as well, and all the buses have to go over them. And I don't think a bus was designed to go over these dirty great lumps in the street. Now, the whole thing about road humps is they represent my second principle of freedom.
Just before you get onto that, David, I wanted to add a couple of things.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but it's
That's
very
right.
important, because everything you said there is absolutely correct. Now, in this so-called mini Holland in Walthamstow, the ambulances cannot find where they're getting to, because you get to the end of a road, it's closed with a tree planter there, and you can't get through, and they put bollards up, and there's no way of finding your way in and out. There is no signposting. I tried to get through there from Hoe Street, and the roads which you could previously cut through all turn into dead ends, and you end up coming out, guess where? About half a mile down from where you've got in. And the ambulances have had terrible trouble there, and there are people in sheltered accommodation. We've done some interviews about this, but to back up your point, when I broke my arm particularly badly, the agony of going over those road humps is unbelievable. And these ambulance people are basically picking up people who are in dreadful pain and contributing more to that on the way to the hospital if they can get there.
Yeah, well, this is my third principle, which I'll get to in a moment, about the solution is worse than the problem. So if you have a situation where they claim, quite falsely, because now under freedom of information we know how many people have been killed or injured before and after the road humps, and same with speed cameras, it makes no difference at all, because most accidents are caused by negligence, whether alcohol induced or not. and the speed is irrelevant because out in the country we still have 60-mile-an-hour speed limits on narrow, winding country lanes, but 90% of the people, 90% of the roads can't be driven at 60, and people use their discretion. And if you took away overnight every speed limit in England, people would all drive at the same speed because they don't want to have an accident. You don't really need mandatory speed limits. I think in Australia they have variable ones that you are allowed to drive between something like 30 and 60 depending on the conditions or the time of day, and that would work. But just think of all the money that they would lose from speed tickets.
That's a very important point you've just brought up there, because
Yeah.
the police have actually said, yes, it's great that we've got these new speed cameras on the motorways, especially the M1, the improvements to the M1, which includes putting cameras on every single bridge, because they put the markings are already there, for the speed cameras. It's now they bring in the PR story. Well, the PR story on this is particularly funny because it's not about safety. The police have just blatantly said we need to raise an extra $1 million. Here's a good way of doing it. So, in other words, gets back to my previous point. These people in public office are now the enemy of the people.
Yeah. Well, basically what they're saying is it's like the killing of the firstborn in the Bible. We've got your testicle, now we'll take one of your kidneys. You only need one kidney to survive. You just hand over one of your kidneys, we'll do something really important with it. What are you going to do with it? Oh, it doesn't matter. Just go into the treasury, into the kidney bank, and we'll use it when we need it. Don't you worry about that, but people will be better off. And there you are, if you get kidney disease and one of your kidneys goes fuck, you haven't got the other one, you die of kidney failure. So in the end, we all suffer, and somebody does well out of it.
Well, maybe that's what the future of these Agenda 21 sustainable mini Hollands is. It's actually basically, we can't get you in or out of here to the hospital, so would you like to donate your organs now before you die at the side of the road?
Well, of course. I mean, ultimately, it's what is it? The 500 million ideal population of the world, a reduction of 80%. So, unfortunately, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and people die as a result of it, maybe it's because they want people to die. So there you go.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point, because we've spoken about this before. So it starts out with 20 miles per hour speed limits and cycle lanes, and it's not about that. It's about population reduction. But you try telling you can't make that leap with most people. But in the end, they will get it, and they are starting to get it, because the policies of the Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030, it's now been rebranded. I've been covering for the past 4 or 5 weeks, really on and off, and previously, because I did a whole show on this mini Holland before it was brought in. But the implementation of that has been so draconian and so over the top, it's surpassed even what I thought they would do.
Yeah, well, it's what they can get away with. I mean, Ken Livingstone was the first and best example, so much so that in the last interview I said I named it the Ken Livingstone principle. It's the same as children and ants. When children are young, they'll see these little ants walking on the street and they'll squash them. And if their parents there don't do that, why not? Well, it's cruel. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And it's not illegal. Now, Ken Livingstone said he wouldn't get rid of route master buses, and he wouldn't increase or spread the congestion charge. And people voted him in that he would have a limited congestion charge for £5 in the ring road around central London. Now, of course, he put that up to about £7 and doubled the size of it. And he was interviewed, and they said, well, you promised you wouldn't do it. Why did you? He said, because I can. Now, that is a tyrant. That's a psychopath. Nobody, given the power, should abuse it. Now, abuse of power and abuse of trust is one of the greatest crimes against humanity, because people all voted in Ken Livingstone to look after them. And what did he do? He screwed them up the backside, if I'm allowed to say that.
Well, you are allowed to say that. And this is exactly what's happened in most of these boroughs with these Agenda 21 policies, which updates that. This is the thing that I think it's very good. We were just talking before the show about Jeremy Corbyn and why that is a refreshing thing, whether people think about right, left, centre, it doesn't matter. What we now have is an opposition to consensus politics.
Oh yeah, and the thing about Jeremy Corbyn is, I was saying to my father the other day, who was a proud Labour supporter of that field, that agree with him or not, what's the point of having two parties that are the same? I mean, if Labour had to become more like the Conservatives to get voted in, it means they were more interested in power than principle. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn says, whether or not I get in, this is what I believe in, this is technically, if you look in your politics books, that's what Labour represents. And he's just saying, well, this is real Labour, like it or bugger off. And they're getting rid of people that don't like it because they're having this purge of the Blairites because they're not proper Labourites. And then you can stand, if you're going to be the wolf in sheep's clothing, take your sheepskin off, say you're going to vote for a wolf. If you want to vote for a wolf, vote for one, but at least you know what you're voting for. And that's real Labour. And if people don't want it, they'll kick them out. And if they do want it, then, we've got to live with it. But at least they're honest about it.
Exactly. It's taken us out of this communitarian consensus nonsense, which I'm seeing so much more and more of. And I'm just looking at a change agent newspaper from Waltham Forest here. And the stuff I was saying a year ago, it's all absolutely right. And the reason that show that we did, remember when you were sat outside, and it was all part of this Mini Holland thing and the Agenda 21, a year on, it's absolutely spot on. And these change agents are embedded now, and what they call social enterprise is being taught to children in school, and they're going to invest in social enterprise, which means the policies of Agenda 21, climate change, and enslaving themselves to their whole lives,
Well, I mean, where I'm, I don't know if we're on a hill here, so you can see outside and see all these skyscrapers which are offices. In the last 2 years, we've had cranes going up, and the 600-person council estate, which was built in the 60s after a bomb site was houses were demolished, is being removed and replaced by a 3,000-person council estate, or social housing on the same area. Plus there was a large car park which used to be free for the shoppers, which then they charged for. They've just got rid of it and built a block of flats on that, so that's the car parking gone, and they're squeezing them in. So what they're doing under Agenda 21 Smart Cities, they have put up something like, after the 1960s were discredited for tower blocks, they put up, I think so far it's up to 20 stories because it's got numbers on the concrete, and I can see one of them from my bedroom window at one end, and now, a week ago, there's a whole row of cranes in Colindale in the north. And I'm thinking, what's going on now? And they've got all round Edgware Road on the A5, if anyone knows the area, they're putting up these tower blocks for housing, which was supposed to be something which they were getting rid of from the 60s. Now they're making new ones again, after they know they're wrong. And where are they going to get all the sewage and the schools and the children going to play and everything if they're 20 stories up in the air? It makes no sense at all.
No, it's the stack and pack Agenda 21 thing. In fact, that's what's happened in most boroughs. What they're doing is they're making London bigger, and the places outside London are becoming satellites, commuter satellites, and they're destroying the villages. But this is an ongoing thing, and the whole landscape is being irrevocably changed. And maybe we should get into what we can do about it. Have you got any more points to make before we do that?
Well, the first thing we can do about it is what we're doing now, because it's all about exposure. So back to my basic principle. If you expose an illusion for what it really is, now the road humps and the roads are such a great example, because when I'm doing counselling, I talk about driving lessons for that, because there are only so many hazards on the road, and your driving instructor teaches you to recognise all the worst hazards so you know what to do and you're prepared for them. And counsellors do the same in life. There are multiple more hazards in life and more solutions than driving, but the principles aren't that different. So if you're doing the same with politics and economics, then you can simplify things for people so it's so impossible to get it wrong that you understand it. If you're driving along a road and nobody says that these road humps are there to help you, so you haven't been hypnotised, because I do hypnosis, I know the tricks, it's a power. Like anything else, it can be used for good or for evil. You can persuade somebody to do some awful things with it, or you can get rid of their illness. And it's up to the hypnotist to be decent, again, like Ken Livingstone, to be honest and look after the person that they're paid to look after.
Yes, working under natural law, which is something that has to be learned and should be built into every human being, but been sucked out by the education system.
That's
basically.
Right. It's the golden rule. Treat others as you would do for yourself. So Think about your blood system and your breathing. If you smoke, you're going to get lung problems sooner or later, and your bloodstream's going to get thick, and the blood's going to have terrible trouble going through because of the fat and the deposits narrowing the arteries. If you do that to a road and you're driving from A to B, it doesn't matter what you're driving, your journey is going to be ruined, it's going to be harder, and the car is going to be damaged by it. There is no excuse for putting lumps in the road that shouldn't be there. Now, I can't see any way around that, because the point is, you can very easily, if you've got to, we've talked about it just now, about narrowing roads, at least it's not going to wreck the car. If you've got to drive around chicanes, it's a pain, but at least it's not slowing you down in a dangerous way, and it means that you don't slam on the brakes and then start again, and slam on the brakes and start again. You're basically wearing out the car in every possible way every time you go over a road hump.
Well, it's very interesting because it is actually a complete oxymoron, because a road is meant to be travel. Yeah, you're meant to travel along a road. A road is built or made so that you have smooth passage of travel.
Exactly.
So what on earth is this about? It's the opposite. Again, it's saying, no, we don't want you to drive, but we're not actually going to take the car off you. We're going to do this to you. We're just going to give you some mild torture.
That's right. So they make it so bad that they put you off driving. And if you ask some of the councillors, they say, "Yeah, well, that's what we do. We don't believe in driving. Why not? There's another thing. It's a mental illness. It's a delusion that they've picked up. It's a meme." But yeah, we won't tell you not to drive, but we'll just make it so bad that you'll give up on your own accord. Then you'll go on a bus, and you'll go on the same roads on the bus, and it won't have changed at all. So in the end, or you get a train if you're lucky. You know, if you can afford it, you take out a second mortgage for your season ticket. Now they're so expensive. That's a separate but connected issue, because all the public transport, since it's been privatised, the cost has probably gone up 10 times in real terms from what it was in the 70s. So
yes, and it gets passed on from one company to another, and they kind of run it into the ground, which has happened to that rail disaster a few years ago. It was all due to lack of maintenance, and that's really what we're doing. So we're basically allowing these corporations to rinse things for a certain amount of time and then just leave them to fall apart. But also, it's this insidious, brave new world that's being put into generations of kids now, that the state owns them in every single way, and it's their duty to believe in everything they are told. Now, how do we break that down?
Well, if people understand that they're being played for fools, and that collectivism, there is no state, there is no society, in the way that Margaret Thatcher explained it, that society is fluid, but individuality is fixed. So, we've got the fireworks going off. Lucky we avoided it this long. I know. Well, we did all right to avoid them till now. Anyway, yes. So society. You cannot help society until you help yourself. It's the same with healers. Put it to an individual situation that a doctor or a carer has got to be ill, has got to be well themselves before they can treat someone that's ill. So you have to be fit before you can be part of a good society. So if society is making you weaker and poorer, then society is going to be weak and poor. So you have to be allowed to thrive. And there is no such thing as authority over another person. Authority is something which is given to people. It's a privilege and not a right. Your rulers are not ruling you. If they rule you, they become tyrants. They're not there to tell you what to do. They're there to help you, because you can't do everything yourself. And it's just like paying for a cleaner or paying for a builder. You are paying them to do what you can't do yourself. And the government are there not to tell us how we should live and to take away all our moral choices and impose their morals on us and tell us where we can live. I mean, China, Agenda 21, because they've got no human rights in China, they are forcibly moving millions of people from the countries to these new cities that they're building, because that's what they do when they can. And you don't see that on the BBC on Panorama saying, "Oh, look at China! They're forcing people to come out of the countryside and live in these tall buildings, and we're doing it here, but we can't force you to do it. So we're just making it so difficult for people to live anywhere else that they'll do it anyway."
Well, that's a very good point, because the BBC is the equivalent of state TVs. All they're doing is imposing the same thing as the Chinese are doing, but they're trying to do it in this kind of way where it looks as though we've still got some kind of democratic choice. But when I look at BBC News, you can see what the model of that is. And somebody actually put some comment about that. I basically said communitarianism is really the equivalent of communism, to make it simple.
Yeah.
And then what you get is somebody coming in saying, oh, due diligence and but communitarianism versus communism. But basically, you talk about collectivism. It's like the individual has no rights. That's all we're talking about. Keep it simple. Always keep it simple. And what I find is that the other side always bring it down to this kind of petty. And the thing is, always stick to the points. With this stuff, keep it simple and brief, because the opposition, all they do is sidetrack. The BBC is the equivalent of state Chinese TV. There isn't really any difference.
Really, no. It's just that in China you can't criticise the government or the broadcaster, or you'll disappear somehow. And here you do it. And I mean, now with all these laws they're trying to get against causing offence, you'll get a knock on the door. I mean, now they're going to try and make it illegal to deny climate change, even though it hasn't actually happened yet.
Even though there's no evidence for it, and the IPCC rely on consensus science, which means it's not science, it's just something that was made up that we all have to agree with.
Yeah, and I saw through it straight away. I did science up till halfway through A level. It's obvious, because you only need the most basic rules of science, again, like you do with politics and economics, and just be able to add up arithmetic, and the arithmetic does not work. And the IPCC say that the actual 2 centigrade, or even approaching a trend for 2 centigrade, can't and won't happen from at least 2050 to 2100. Now, that is an experiment that can't be completed, because we won't know the results till we're dead. So, any experiment that you don't know the results for 50 years isn't just not happening now, but we'll never know. So it's void, it's worthless. You can roll it up, throw it in the bin and say it doesn't exist until it starts to exist, and we can see the trend. They're pulling your plonkers, which is what they're doing.
Exactly, and I'm just looking at a Change Agent newspaper that comes out in Waltham Forest. Says join the divest movement, which means that you basically tell people to stop investing in what they call fossil fuels, which is something that they don't even understand the meaning of anyway. And it says the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, Norway's government pension fund, has done it. The Guardian Media Group has done it. The British Medical Association has done it. Several universities have done it, and now several local councils are discussing it too. The arguments are simple. 1. If global warming is to be limited below 2 degrees centigrade, up to 80% of known carbon reserves must be left in the ground.
Yeah, no peak oil now.
Exactly. The fossil fuel industry already holds vast carbon reserves, which could result in emissions 5 times greater than that deemed safe. 3. The necessary emission targets will create stranded assets for fossil fuel companies. 4. Shares invested in fossil fuels support a business model incompatible with international agreements on climate change. But that number 3 there is very sinister. They're basically saying that your assets will be stranded if you invest in this. We're talking about, this is totalitarian nonsense that's being imposed on people with this green agenda, and it's absolutely sickening. And every single community in this country has got this in it, as we've discussed. You've got these people, these change agents. The actual extent that this has moved in the past couple of years has surprised even me. But again, let's just tie this up about what can we do about it.
Yeah, we are the antidote.
Yes.
Believe me, you and I and people like us, we're all the antidote, because what we're doing is we're lifting up the veil and saying, look what's underneath. It's all a pile of rubbish. And we're not persuading you. It's not our opinion, because we can tell you why. So I'll move on from your last example to explain why renewables aren't real. And children, if you said to a 7 or an 8-year-old, what would happen? I mean, these BMA, I didn't know the BMA had divested. Now, firstly, the divestment is very much like pre-war Berlin, where they were closing down Jewish businesses and taking away their assets. But now it's humanity. The useless eaters are now the Jews. So going from the Jews and the homosexuals and the gypsies in pre-war Germany, they're now going for all of us except for the elite. And it's exactly the same. So what's the easiest thing to accuse them of? Screwing up the climate. We're screwing up the climate. Therefore, we've got to be dealt with. We'll deal with the human problem, not the Jewish problem now, but the useless eater human problem. How will we do it? By making their lives so difficult that they won't use up so much energy. People don't realise that the Kyoto Protocol wasn't about renewable energy, it was about reducing the demand for energy. Now, as we all need to live at an optimum temperature, which is about 70 degrees or so indoors, whatever happens, then if you reduce that, you'll get ill. And if you reduce it even more, as they say, 3,000 people every year die of hypothermia in Britain because they can't afford their heating bills, and tens of thousands more don't die, go to hospital as a result of not being able to pay for their heating. So by making fuel and energy and food unaffordable, they are killing people off. And it's working. So, it does happen. You've got an exact number of deaths from putting up heating. And The Guardian actually did a report saying that 75 biofuel put food prices up by 75% by burning food and taking over crops for biofuel from food. So they know what they're doing. And even the UN admitted that biofuels are wrong, but none of the countries stopped using them. There's a bit of a hint there. So renewables, if you say to the BMA that, if you're getting rid of fossil fuel, how many of your hospitals are run on wind and solar? They'll say none, and you'll say, why not? I'd like to ask them one because I haven't had an answer yet. So that's the first thing. Now, the thing about wind and solar and electric cars, which are their three so-called solutions, if you said to a group of 7-year-olds, is the wind blowing now? No, it's not. How often does it blow? Oh, not very often, actually. And when does it blow strongly? Oh, I can't remember. So well, if I was to put a load of windmills in your school playground, and when they turned from 8 to 30 miles an hour, you could power the school, would you think that was a good source of power? They say, no, of course not. It hardly ever blows. Now, the actual figure that it blows in Britain is under 10%. Now, it doesn't matter how good the wind turbines are, they could be gold-plated with diamonds up them, but they can never work unless the wind is blowing less than 10% of the time. You can't change the wind because you're relying on the unreliable. So, in fact, wind turbines are the biggest con of all, because it was actually in the paper today or yesterday, thank goodness, so the public are informed that they are now building diesel backups all over Britain to compensate for the 90% of the time the wind turbines aren't on. What they don't tell you, this is the bit that how we can break the illusion, is that you can't switch on a diesel generator and get power from it. It takes about a week to warm up. So they're on all the time. So you've got all these diesel generator backups on all the time. And you watch these wind turbines. We've got 3 of them in Propeller Park in Neasden. And I don't think I've ever seen them go around more than about once a year. I go past them every week and they're always absolutely still. There's 3 of them. They never move. And you think, well, most wind turbines also they actually have motors, and they can make them turn around when the Queen comes round, so they don't all give power. They actually use an awful lot of power for the brakes and for the things that turn them to the wind, and the heaters that stop them freezing and everything else. And sometimes if they won't start, you have to press a little button like you do in your car, and it sends them spinning, so they send them off. So you're putting an awful lot of power into those wind turbines, so they actually consume lots of unseen power. Anyway, back to the diesel generators. The diesel generators have to be on the whole time, and you draw from them sometimes, which is 90% of the time per wind farm. So you might as well just get rid of the wind turbines and run the diesel. See, so that's a complete illusion, busted, just for wind turbines.
What we've uncovered of those three shows I think we've done now,
yeah.
And that first one on Mini Holland, we can just say, okay, we told you so.
Exactly.
And what I'm seeing now, as I keep reiterating, because I'm actually horrified about what's going on, about the way society's being completely engineered, and people are totally unaware of it.
Yeah, well, they're being manipulated. But the great thing is, I mean, I discovered recently, I don't think Marx actually invented dialectical materialism. He just publicised it. But he's absolutely right that society is like a piece of elastic. If you stretch it too far in one direction, it will snap back. And I think they're crossing lines now, because what happens is, if you're not subtle enough, if the devil actually starts being nasty instead of pretending to be nice, or the wolf in sheep's clothing lets his slip show and you start seeing his wolf legs, people say, oh my goodness, hang on a minute, they're not, why are they doing this? I thought they were working for us, they're our friends. And then their state of mind shifts to thinking, hang on a minute, I don't trust the government, maybe all those other things Mark Windows said were right after all. And they get an epiphany, it's like an enlightenment. Oh my God. I mean, with me, with the climate, it was incredibly simple, because I was fascinated by anything different. So I was reading all this stuff on global warming in the 90s. And then about 10 years after they started it, just before the internet in my case, I saw an article which showed the latest figures. Now, the temperature you can't really discern, because it changes 10 degrees or 20 degrees per day. So nobody can ever discern average temperature for the world. I mean, they can't even measure it if the truth were known. But nobody would ever know what it is, so you can tell them what you like, and the people trust them because they're scientists. I'm speaking as Barack Obama or Emma Thompson, so you've got to believe me, or Leonardo DiCaprio. They're talking out their backsides.
Well, it's brilliant, David, watching the UN Goals and Objectives video, and the comments underneath that were pretty overwhelmingly negative and incredibly cynical about this nonsense and these puppets that they've got up there spouting this crap about climate change and sustainability. And people have actually caught on to that now. So there is some hope. And you're right, what you just said is very important, that these things are being rushed through clumsily, and they think they've got everything in place. But they haven't. They might have their little communitarian newspapers and their little hubs of social enterprise, which means basically everyone works for nothing apart from the stakeholders who are running the show. That is really falling apart, because self-employed people particularly are finding this out.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, only reality exists, so they can hide it for as long as they can temporarily. So what they're doing now is they're basically collecting money while the door is open. So every day we're paying carbon taxes, somebody's profiting. And the longer they keep it and delay the truth from coming out, because I said to my mother yesterday that the only way, if people don't wake up, that they'll realise this is in 10 or 20 years, unless they rewrite the temperatures and lie about them, which is pretty difficult, because there's at least 4 different sources of temperature that they use, and they'd have to fiddle with all of them. I don't even, it's possible, but I don't think it's possible at that level, because there are people that can measure them independently. But the way I saw it was a con was so simple, because I saw that the sea level was still rising at less than an inch a decade. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, if the sea level is rising at the same rate as it was for the whole 20th century, where the temperature went up 0.5 degree, then the temperature clearly can't be going up any more than that, because the sea level is absolutely linked to temperature. It has to go up. As the temperature rises, 50% is from expansion and 50% is from the land ice melting. So if that sea level, which you can measure if you go to the coast, they've got photos of places like Florida and California from the 1930s and now, and the sea level, the beach is exactly where it was before, and they've got South Sea Islands where they're actually sinking at 1 inch or 2 a year. But they've got these tide gauges where you can see that the sea level hasn't changed for 200 or 300 years. Now, that is solid evidence, not this nonsense they tell you from these adjusted temperature figures.
Exactly. The IPCC and all of these change agents, they're relying on a lie.
Yep.
And they can't prove it. They can only do it by consensus, by trying to make it look as though everyone agrees, which is everything that's wrong with this communitarian agenda, which has been pushed through by Cameron, and hopefully the real left, Corbyn, may be able to do something about it, because we need now to take this country back, and actually to take the world back off the United Nations and the EU, as far as we're concerned in this country anyway.
Well, what I said to you on the phone not long ago, I remember now, when you asked me the same question, what is the solution? I said, well, It's two halves. One is the information, which is my website, the Information Revolution, on Blogspot and Facebook, which everyone can join and have a look at. It's about publicity. It's about numbers. There is a tipping point in society. So it's the publicity. You have a tipping point. I think they said 20% in society, where 20% of the people know the truth. It will pass on to the majority because it will be too much to sustain the lie. So what I said is, if they took 1, 2 or 3 of my interviews from you and everyone else like us and put one of them on Channel 4, you would probably get 2 or 3 million people overnight saying, oh my God, look what they've done, and it would blow away. Because Channel 4 showed the great climate change swindle, and they got thousands of people off the drug. You know, because it is a bit like a drug. I mean, climate change is like heroin.
Well, it's a religion. It's actually a religion.
It's a cult. It's a cult.
Yeah.
And you have to bust the cult. You have to actually get people off this awful drug of the belief in climate change in order to wake them up again, because they're acting as zombies. It's groupthink. When I go on the internet, all these people accept that there's, or they, in their minds, they accept that fossil fuel industry, which is actually the energy industry, because they've got just as much investment in renewables as they do in oil, but they don't realise that. And they say, oh, they're conspiring to stop people from doing anything about climate change, when in fact, when you say, well, in fact, they're making huge amounts of money, and the governments around the world, and George Soros and Al Gore and Bill Gates are conspiring to create it so that they can enslave the whole of society. They say, oh, that's rubbish, it's a conspiracy theory. And I said, well, hang on a minute, you just said it was a conspiracy from big oil to stop the thing getting out. Now, we both agree that you can have a worldwide conspiracy. We just disagree who's doing it, and they can't get their heads around that because they've just said it's rubbish. You know, you're getting them to stand in a circle and pee in the corner, and they go round in circles and they get lost in the end. So in the end, I think we can undo these mindsets, because there's just too much nonsense behind it. And
I think so, and it's very encouraging that, you know, there are younger people waking up to this, because they're the ones who are being particularly programmed now. They're the ones who are being programmed through the schools, and basically it's cradle to grave control. Has that ever worked? I don't think it really has. We're in this is a scientific and psychological dictatorship that's trying to take control of the minds for consensus, and I find it horrific, but I don't see that ultimately it can work, because it's been implemented so draconian in that respect, and also very clumsily.
Yeah, the thing is, as soon as somebody suffers and they're affected by it, they change sides. We haven't got time to wait for individuals to come one by one. They are very useful, and they demonstrate the formula very nicely, that as soon as you are personally affected, and they say, never learn from your mistakes, always learn from other people's. It's a lot less painful. So instead of having to learn from your own stupidity, people have got to deduce that if it hurts one person's relative from either high energy prices and they die of hypothermia, do they want their own grandma to die of hypothermia before they realise that these ridiculous carbon restrictions are just putting up energy prices, ruining the economy and hurting people today for goodness knows what tomorrow?
Real sustainability is the human race sustaining itself. Okay, in harmony with nature, but not in harmony with the lies that are being fed us.
Not past the we are not Borg, and we will not be assimilated. It's that simple.
Thanks very much, David. Give us your websites again. It's
informrevolution.blogspot.co.uk. It's Information Revolution, and it's Information Revolution on Facebook, which is an open group, so anyone can just type it in and join and have a look, and if they disagree with it, they can say whatever they like. That's entirely up to them. And the two things are connected. The blog is all the information I give you, and the other one's a discussion of it. And it's the revolution to wake people up and enlighten them.
Thanks a lot, David, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.